Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am O'Brien McMahon, and this is People Business. In this episode, I am joined by Chuck Wisner. Chuck has spent 30 years as a trusted advisor, coach, and teacher in communication, human dynamics, and leadership excellence. He's worked with leaders and their teams in Fortune 200 companies. He has trained in mediation and worked as a senior mediator affiliated with the Harvard Mediation Program at the Harvard Law School, and later was associated with MIT's Center for Organizational Learning. His book, The Art of Conscious Conversations, Transforming How We Talk, Listen, and Interact, explores how to heighten our awareness and become more conscious in the conversations that we have day to day. I am a big fan of this topic. I was really excited when Chuck's team had reached out to me with some interest in coming on the show. I think just about every problem we have in humanity comes down to poor communication, either our inability to communicate or our inability to listen. You see it over and over and over again. So many problems are communication problems. We go deep in this conversation into how our thinking shapes our communication and how we can get a better handle on our thinking so that we can then have better communications down the road. And not just better communications, but like really make some breakthroughs for ourselves so that we are living in a better ecosystem in our own head, which then allows us to have some better conversations. So this was a ton of fun. I think there is stuff in here for every person, no matter who you are. We are all walking around talking to other people. And just because we've been talking our whole lives does not mean that we are good at it. So I hope you enjoy this. I hope you take some stuff away. I hope it helps improve not only your conversations, but your own mindset, your own life. Here is Chuck Wisner. Chuck, welcome to the show. Excited to dive in today. I really enjoyed our initial conversation and reading your book, The Art of Conscious Conversations. I say all the time to my wife, much to her chagrin, words matter. And I think even beyond that, to the point of your book, like mindset matters when it comes to the words. So I remind her that words matter, and she reminds me that my tone sucks. I think
it's a good combo.
Between the two of us, we could have a good, healthy conversation somehow. But no, excited to dive in and wanted to maybe start with defining some terms. You wrote that you studied the ontology of language, and that was impactful to your learning, to your life, and to the writing of the book. Can you explain what the heck that is? What is the ontology of language?
I guess fundamentally it's about how language shapes who we are as a species. We have language of words, and it shapes how we think about and see the world, our being based on language. And then the studies actually were with these really brilliant philosophers and linguists, where you really take language apart a bit, take conversations apart so we can understand them in a new way. And like fish in water, I think this quote is in my book, we're like humans in conversation, not aware of the water we're swimming in. Mm-hmm. Because we learn conversations through our families and our cultures and our experiences, automatically pick them up. And it works a lot of times, but then there's a lot of patterns we have that don't work. So it's that sort of having a fresh look and new distinctions about how language works and how conversations work, so we can't be in them quite so innocently.
Is this like the concept? I'm going to butcher this a little bit, but I've heard that Japanese has, I'm making this number up, but something like 8 different words for rain, right? There's one word that means torrential downpour. There's another word that means light mist. There's another word that means rain falling through clear sky as the sun pierces through it. They just have all these beautiful meanings behind all these different words. And my understanding is that actually shapes then a lot of their actual thinking. And so the way that they would reason or negotiate or interact with somebody else is shaped then by the fact that they maybe have more nuance in their language or less nuance in their language, or there's certain elements to their language that then would shape actual behavior. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yes. And similarly, if you and I went to Alaska and spent 6 months with Inuits, they have 20 or 30 names for snow.
Yeah.
And if we learned the lovely Japanese names for rain, or let's stick with the snow, if we learned the snow names and we came back to New England, where I'm from, or back to Chicago, you would never see snow the same way. So the distinction of different kinds of snow changes how you interact with, think about, and behave around the snow, which then affects how you interact with people. So what we want to do is have new distinctions about language, how it works, why it doesn't work, so that we can't be doing it on autopilot innocently, but we now have a responsibility to go, oh, wow, I never knew that. I can do it this way. I don't have to fall back on an old pattern that doesn't serve me well.
Interesting. And so can you just share maybe a little bit about your journey through this work and the way that you then got clear on what some of your worldviews were or your mental templates were, how you broke them, perhaps?
Yeah. So the studies, when you start looking at language, one of the first things you do is realize that I had these master stories about how the world worked, full of judgments, full of my beliefs of what was right or wrong that I adopted from my culture and my family. We need those stories, but there's many of them that don't serve us well. When I started looking at my master stories, I had to write about them. And there were two. One is being very judgmental and negative. And the other was I grew up with a grandfather who was a redneck and always told me I wasn't a big enough man. As a young boy, when I was told that constantly because I showed emotion or I didn't want to skin the deer or I didn't, whatever, I wasn't a big enough man. I adopted that story from my grandfather because he was an adult. I was a little, what do I know? He must be right. He knows the world. I adopted that and I lived with that for 30 years until I busted it when I was studying that particular master story that was holding me back. Luckily, I had a grandmother on my mother's side who adored me. And for her, I could practically walk on water. Rather than be a schizophrenic, I think her story won out. And I was able to dismiss the other story that was his story about men, but not my story about what it needs to be a man.
Yeah. And so then, so you go through that exercise and you realize maybe you've been carrying the story that your grandfather had laid on you. You shed that story. And then what? You just walk around more free and that's the end of the work? Or how does that impact then the way you show up, the way you connect and communicate with other people?
Okay, so the personal side is that once I'd busted the story, I walked in, I was an architect then, and the man who started the firm where I became a partner, his name was Bill. We were good friends. We worked together for years. When that story finally busted for me, it really busted it out of my system. And I realized that I didn't have to adopt my grandfather's standards. Bill and I were having coffee one morning. And in my head, I looked at Bill and I said, oh my gosh, I'm taller than Bill. And I never saw myself that way. I never saw myself taller than him. And that was shocking, the power of how the story had this literal, physical impact on how I saw myself and how I projected myself. So not only did I get it internally, but then I realized, oh, that limits how I can show up positively, or that limits how I can show up with confidence, or that limits how I can show up whatever way I want as the man I want to be. And so that you do the personal work and then it reflects on how I interact with people and how I show up in the world.
Yeah. Was that a particularly hard worldview to let go of, or did you come up with your alternative truth that felt more true than the original truth, and it was easy to the other one just fell away naturally?
Yeah, so the investigation involves, first of all, recognize the emotional piece. So what were the emotions that story was giving me insecurity, or I was an architect and I would be successful, but I would stand up in front of a board or something to do a presentation. And that little voice was, it's not good enough. You're not strong enough. You're not loud enough. You're whatever, smart enough. So that was there. So you bust that. And then I looked at, what are the facts? The facts were that I was some 30 years old or so. I had 2 kids. I was an architect. It was my second career. I had a beautiful wife. I had a house. Wait a minute, I was 6 feet tall. What doesn't add up here? And so I could bust it partially based on real facts. And then the next thing was to say, he had a set of standards about what a real man is. And when I looked at those, it was what he was taught and what he adopted, and he was projecting them on me. I could then say, what standards do I want to live by? What standards do I want to believe a good man is? And then you lean into that, and there's no magical switch, but you lean into that, and slowly that becomes your reality instead of the old story.
Yeah. The reason I ask these questions is I've done some of this work with the coach that I work with. And a big part of that work is writing your worldview. So it's just writing all the beliefs that you have, unfiltered, good, bad, ugly, the whole thing.
Right.
And then going back through and figuring out which of those are real, which are not, which do you want to change. And what I've found in doing that work is once I find a truth that is more true than the old truth, maybe there's a little piece of some belief I have that's true. But if I look at it from a different angle, I realize there's this much broader truth out there that I believe in just as much as I believed in that. And it's just, as soon as I can latch onto a new belief, I find the old one almost immediately falls away. It can take a lot of work to get to whatever that new belief is. But I find that I'll do the work and it's like a Rubik's Cube. Like you just spin it one more time and all of a sudden all the colors match and you're just like, oh, and it just clicks. Yeah, no, that's what I believe. And then everything else falls away. And I don't know I was just curious if that was your experience too.
Yeah, I would just put a little finer distinction on it, because when you're doing that work of looking at your beliefs, still I think the filter of what's real, what's true, because our beliefs aren't necessarily the truth. What's true? Are we denying reality in some way? So do that work. What's true, what's not true. It's just gotten a little difficult the last 10 years with the political situation, our loss of reality and fact. But what's true? And then the other piece is all your beliefs are basically opinions that aren't the truth, but are based on your standards, your beliefs, your whole set of assumptions that come with your education when you're growing up. So that distinction helps because sometimes it's easier to start with, is it really true? And
so
then,
let's start there. And then I want to unpack some of the other things you said too, because there's a bunch of meaty stuff there from the book. So it's one thing for us to sit here and say, we realized that truth was not serving us and we found another truth. But I think we all have truths that we sit there and we go, no, that one's definitely true. I'm a fill in the blank negative something. And yeah, I'm an SOB and that's true. How do we look at that differently? Like, how do we start to explore the reality of that truth so that we can see the other angles? Because so many people, these things can be so ingrained. And if you're not used to doing self-reflective work,
right,
it can be really hard to stand up and look at it from a different angle.
Right. And your last comment is right on the money. It's what happens is when we adopt these beliefs, a lot unconsciously often, because they're from our culture, our education, our family, our experiences. When we adopt them, our ego comes into play. And so our identity is attached to the belief. Right. Whether it's positive or negative, we have this identity attachment syndrome. So if we're willing to have the courage to look and go, let me investigate that. Is that truly me, or is that a belief that I unconsciously adopted and isn't serving me well?
Yeah.
And just some of those questions, it's a detachment thing. In Buddhism, it's called detachment, where now I can stand out here as a witness and look and go, let me look at the story. And then I have a little more freedom because my ego isn't going to be rattling my brain going, oh, no, you're right. You really are that jerk, or you really are that way, or you really are the most wonderful man in the world. Whatever that is, detaching from it gives you that distance so you can witness.
Yeah. That's a good point there on the most interesting man or most whatever best man in the world. You want to explore some of those too. And some of those things are probably not fully true,
Not true.
either.
It's perfect.
Yeah.
They feel good, but they might not be serving you well because
you just ran through a bunch of business partners. Your relationships are falling apart. Maybe we need to take a look at that one.
There's a lot of arrogance and little humility.
Yeah. That's a good point. That is a good point. So you talked about how our beliefs are really opinions. And in the book, you dive into the 4 elements of an opinion. Could you highlight what those are?
Yeah. Back up a little bit. So often leading is our emotions. And what we forget is that emotions are a physical manifestation of our thinking.
Emotions are a physical manifestation of our thinking. Okay.
I think Proust said it a little better than me, but that the idea is that when you have an emotion, don't deny your emotion, but you realize that the emotion is driven by your thoughts and your beliefs and your thinking, often unconsciously. You have these thoughts, something happens, your brain takes in the information, you have a story, you have a reaction based on your beliefs, right? And then we forget to look at them, or we forget to separate and go, I feel angry, but really what's driving the anger? Is it because my boundaries have been voided? Is someone not being fair to me? Whatever it is. So our thinking is critical. And the thinking is basically deconstructing our opinions. And so when you ask her what the 4 components of opinions are, these 4 questions that I love to talk about are a great shortcut for deconstructing or taking apart a strong judgment or a strong opinion.
Okay, so before we get into those now, I just want to say this back and make sure I get this, because it's a little complicated, but I think it makes a lot of sense. So our beliefs are really opinions. It's just how we perceive the world. It's our opinion on the world.
Right.
Those are just like preloaded in our head. So when things happen, we are unconsciously filtering that immediately through those opinions. And so something happens and it's immediately good or bad or just or unjust, or I don't like those people, or whatever it is.
Right.
We immediately filter that. And then that thought kicks off an emotion before we can even recognize what's happened.
That's right. Because it bypasses it. Our neocortex doesn't kick in. It goes through the amygdala. All the emotional stuff kicks in. And so literally the emotion is a chemical reaction to the event based on your thinking.
Yeah. And I looked up real quick the quote by, I think it was Shakespeare from Hamlet, that says, there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it.
That's perfect. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm so following now.
Okay. So the one important thing about looking at our opinions is to recognize that many of them we did not consciously adopt. So rather than judge ourselves, we call it a pattern. I have these patterns of thinking that emerged, evolved over time based on my culture, education, etc., family. And so we adopted them. So when we look at them as patterns, that's another way that we can disconnect from them and go out here, wow, I have an interesting pattern that's not serving me well. Small example, my dad was a great guy, but there were 5 kids, loud house, not well off. We were scrounging off and he worked 2 jobs, but he also had a temper. So when we would get out of control, he would lose his temper and scream and holler and get angry, and then everyone would flee. When I had young kids, way before I did this work, and my kids get out of control, I would get angry and I would holler and I would do this. And when I was able to go, and I was doing the work, when I was able to go, wait a minute, I don't like that pattern, because everyone ends up in tears, including my wife. And so I was able to separate that and go, oh, wow, it's a pattern that doesn't serve me. I can choose a different way to father. So that's just a small example of how we can disassociate and then learn from it.
Yeah. So can we unpack that a little bit further? I appreciate your vulnerability and sharing the personal examples on here. I think it makes it really meaningful. And that resonates with me. I have 2 young boys, and I think all the time about how I'm parenting them. Full disclosure, the coach that I work with recommended that I read The Anger Trap, and I will recommend that to people. I am not really somebody who explodes. And so I was like, I don't know if this is right for me. Okay. And I read the first chapter of the book, and it's all about people who explode with anger. And I was like, I'm not really feeling this. And then I read the second chapter, which was all about people who feel resentment and impatience. And I was like, oh, this is 100% me. Yeah, I'm the simmering under the surface guy.
Yeah, you're not exploding, you're simmering.
Yes.
Which eventually explodes or leaks. One of the two.
It leaks for sure. I found that book to be incredibly helpful. Doing what you're talking about, like separating the reaction from what it is and figuring out what the trigger is. So if anybody is struggling with either explosive anger or that simmering anger, that's a great book. But back to your story, that's why I'm interested in this. What I have found is, even though I know it, those first few times that I catch that pattern, the emotion's still there, because the emotion gets triggered so fast that the emotion's still there. And anger especially, we think of it as a negative emotion, but anger actually feels good. It feels self-righteous and just, and it makes us feel powerful. Right. And so it's a really hard one to break. And I'm just curious what your experience was when you were going through that, or what advice you have for people trying to do this, to be able to, over time, create that new pattern and that open that distance up between the emotion and the reaction. Because I've just found that initially it is very hard to do, even when you're conscious of it.
Yeah. So I have a model. I don't have a whiteboard here, so I can't draw for you, but a model that's like think of a vertical line that's real time or time zero, and something hits the fan, something happens, we get triggered, we have the emotion. So when we're beginning to pay attention, to increase our awareness, you might, let's say 2 hours later, you go, oh, man, I really lost it. And that 2 hour mark is crucial, because at that 2 hour mark, if I go, I really lost it, let me investigate that by the 4 questions, which we'll get into. Let me investigate that. And I'd say, wow, I can do it differently. I can do it this way, because I don't like the consequence of my kids crying, my wife crying. If we do that work 2 hours later, the next time it happens, maybe it's 10 minutes later, and I'm still in the room, and I go, well, stop everything. I want to apologize for what I just said or did, because that's not how I want to father. And then you investigate and you come clean. And then you slowly work that down to real time, where real time you can catch yourself. And that's the work. I mean, there's no switch. If there were, I'd be a rich man, because everyone would pay me $10,000 to help me never do that again.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a process, and it takes, that's what I found too, is it just takes commitment to doing it over time, because you'll do it once or twice, and then you'll succeed once, and you're like, great, I got it. And then you'll screw up the next one. And so it is a process. You need to get the reps in. And over time, I think you will get there and ingrain new behaviors, but it does take a lot of time. I was talking to somebody the other day about behavior and patterning, and whoever came up with you can change your behavior in 21 days, I think is just BS.
Yeah, right. Probably sold a lot of books, but
yeah, my experience is it takes a lot longer than that.
Yeah. I'm not a fan of all these books that promise overnight success with changing our neurons in our brain.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing. We're messing around with neurons in our brain. So it takes some effort and persistence, and also non-judgmental, to not be judging yourself and beating yourself up. I screwed up again.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe we'll find that there's some high dose psychedelic that can help us wipe the slate clean and form new patterns, but I don't think that research has come back yet.
That's a whole nother conversation.
That's a different podcast for sure. All right. So the 4 questions to explore our thinking during these kinds of reactions. And again, it's not just negative reactions, could be positive reactions too, but just the 4 questions to explore our thinking.
Yeah. So the first one is desires. And This one's a little confusing because desires are a good thing. If we have a goal or a desire to succeed in something, that inspires us to do good work. That inspires us to get off our butt and do stuff. That's a good thing. But the dark side of it is we often have desires that don't align with reality. So if we have a desire to get that next promotion or to buy the house and neighborhood we want, right? But when we look at the facts of the situation, they aren't aligned, then our desires in stress because we're fighting reality. Mm-hmm. A positive example about me and my working in my temple with my kids, ultimately my desire there was I don't want to be that kind of father. I want to be a father that is more caring and aware and empathetic and strong too, right? Not turn into a marshmallow. But defining that desire really helped me stay in the practice. Mm-hmm. The negative side is having desires that don't fit reality. I'm not thinking of an example right now. I can think of a work example where a client was a director and wanted the next VP slot. He had worked for 8 years. He was convinced that he was the guy to get that. It was fair. He was the guy to get that. And after the company went through interviews and things, he didn't get the VP job. I was working with the company. Someone introduced him to me. I started working with him. And what we realized was his desire to get that VP job was way, way different. His thinking he was the best man for the job, way different than everyone around him, including his direct reports and his bosses, of what his capabilities were. And that's an example of his ego and his desire to get that VP thing had him blind to really what his capabilities were and what his relationships were.
Yeah, I love that. Just the idea of writing out all of our desires in all different aspects of our lives and then testing to say, are we really on the path to that? How close are we? What gaps do we have to get there? I think that's a very valuable exercise.
Yeah, and the other thing that does is there's a talk, speaking of books that make promises, there's plenty of books out there and saying if you just want it and you want it bad enough, it'll find you. That's just doesn't work that way.
Wait, the secret doesn't work?
Oh, I shouldn't have said that.
Yeah, I'll call it out. You didn't say it, yeah. I did.
Okay, so the next one is concerns. And concerns are, we all know what the word means, but literally every judgment you have, negative, positive, is based on a future time frame. I don't want this to happen again a week from now. I don't want tomorrow to feel like today. But yet in our internal dialogue, in our conversation with others, they're so obvious, we forget to put them on the table and say them out loud.
Yeah.
So concerns are a very safe way to start a difficult conversation. People that are disagreeing and coming into a conversation both convinced that they have the right answer. The question of what are you concerned about is a great way to break some of that tension.
And all right, so we're 2 questions in, and just to, again, level set here. So there's something I want, or there's a scenario I'm feeling some stress about, or there's just a scenario that maybe has some stakes to it, and I want to get clear on my thinking. The first thing I need to ask is, what do I desire here? And let's get clear on my thinking. What am I really after here? And is that aligned with reality?
Yeah. What do I want?
What do I
really want?
The next one is, what am I concerned about? What are my worries or concerns? Mm-hmm. Because those are going to shape my thinking on this. And then we'll get into the other 2, but that's what it is. We're thinking about some future scenario where there's some stakes or there's some seriousness to it. We want to show up the right way in that situation, a situation where we want to show up the right way, or a situation where we just showed up a certain way and we want to evaluate why we just showed up that way. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah. And the concern part, there's an element of the concerns that has to do with our worrying selves, where we can worry without being fully conscious that, wait a minute, at 2:00 in the morning in my nice bed with my soft pillow, there's nothing I can do about this. I'm worrying about the future that I have no control over, or I'm reliving the past that I can't change. So That's a downside of the concern part, that it can drag us into worrisome thinking that isn't very productive.
Okay.
We need to check both sides of that coin.
Yeah. All right. And so we've got clarity on our desires. We've got clarity on our concerns. What are the next two?
So the next one is authority issues. And what that really means is in every conversation, whether it's with our kids, our spouse, our colleagues, our boss, our community, there are always power issues at play. For example, with our friends, some friends give others' friends' voices more authority. Other friends' voices, they might just speak over them. Or men actually do that to women a lot. There's a fair amount of power imbalance there between masculine and feminine energy. In work, it's exasperated because of hierarchies. So we have artificial power issues in hierarchies where the more stripes you have, the more authority you have, responsibility you have, and the more authority you have. And people give your voice a lot of power. I call it the power of 10, that most bosses don't realize. If they speak an opinion, everyone's listening to, that's what Jane wants. That's what she wants us to do, when in fact it was just an opinion. So that's a dynamic in hierarchies that's really important to be aware of. Important for the leader to know that he has to create some psychological safety so he doesn't have a bunch of yes people running around. And important for people to realize that it's okay if you feel safe or if you're willing to take the risk to disagree with the boss for the sake of the project or for the sake of the company. So power issues are everywhere. All we can do with them is be aware of them so that we enter into a conversation with that awareness and the care to take care of the other person, whatever the dynamics are.
Okay. Makes sense.
Yeah. I would just encourage people to investigate a bit because it's an easy one to push aside, but it really plays out a lot in parenting too.
Yeah. And it'd work for sure. I've been in scenarios where we're dealing with somebody and they have all kinds of thoughts and opinions and will be nasty to the person below them. And then all of a sudden their boss walks in the room and their whole attitude changes and they don't say a word and they just sit there quiet with no opinions. And you're like,
yeah,
wait,
wow.
What just happened? Like power, how we react to power definitely shapes a lot of the interactions that we have without us realizing it.
Yeah. And we're all taught to be knowers. We're all taught to have the answer and to advocate for our position. And then the power dynamic plays into that. So yeah, it's a big one. Yeah. And the last one is sometimes my favorite because it's so broad, and it's standards. And I use the word standards because it's a broad term that underneath it is for our morals, our beliefs of what's right or wrong, what's good and bad. And every judgment we have is based on a standard that we most likely didn't even consciously choose.
Yeah. And that goes back to our beliefs, right? It goes back to the worldview that we have these things put on us. Oh, this is good. This is bad. This is what it means to be a good man or a real man or not. This is what it means to be a good girl or not, like all that stuff. Right. Yeah.
All that stuff. Yeah. And so the standards are a wonderful shortcut if we have the courage to go, oh, wait a minute. That was my grandfather's standard of what a man was. It wasn't my standard. I can define my own because they're every judgment. I hate fluorescent lights. That's my opinion. Of course, they're old fashioned now, but because they vibrate. And I don't like to have to spend in a room 8 hours a day and I have a headache afterwards. It's based on some facts, but it's based on my personal opinion about what works for me and what doesn't work. So they're just everywhere, standards. And often in conversations when people are going at it, that's lost. We don't talk about it.
Yeah.
We don't say, wait a minute, are we on the same page here? What does success look like to you? What would a good end result look like to you? Because here are my standards.
Yeah. So that leads into something I wanted to talk about anyway. You talk about collaboration and collaborative conversations. What makes for good collaborators?
Humility and vulnerability. Humility, because I can come into a conversation with a closed fist and say, I know I have the answer. I know this is the right way to go, or this is how whether for family or work. I'm convinced that I have the answer. Then someone else joins and they have their fist. We're arguing about our positions. You're right, I'm wrong. My ego is there. I'm defending myself. I'm asking you questions to prove you wrong, prove me right. That's the normal pattern of how we're taught to converse and how we're taught to have the answer. So collaboration looks like, with the 4 questions, it looks like if I can humbly say, I have a position, and I'm not asking people to give up their position, but I'm asking you to open your hand and go, I have a position. Here are my concerns. Here's my want. I'm not sure I feel safe speaking to my boss about this. I'm not sure it's safe. And here are my standards for how I'm making this judgment, why I'm making this judgment. What I'm doing is what we talked about earlier, our thinking that's driving our emotions. We're revealing that thinking. So that takes a bit of humility to go, I have a position, but I might not have the right answer. It's just one perspective out of many. So when I open my hand, that's being more humble, but it's not being weak. And it's also demonstrating some vulnerability that might invite others to unclench their fist and to have a conversation. To answer your question, a really good collaborative conversation is open hands, open hearts, mutual learning.
Yeah.
Where I could say, wow, I never thought of it that way. What you just said made me think differently.
And I think we can all hope and wish and desire, to use your word, that the people that we interact with have the skill set and the thoughtfulness and the humility to come in and engage with us in that way. The truth is, this stuff is a skill, and most of the people who are listening to this are going to be engaged in building these types of skills way more than the people that they come across. Not everybody is as attuned to this stuff or interested in this stuff. And so I think instead of having the desire that everybody's going to show up and meet you there, I think it's an opportunity for people who are listening to this to be the ones to lead this type of discussion in the conversation. Because just as much as you can come in and offer this stuff up, I think you can also come in and be curious about it in somebody else. And I think these 4 questions give you a framework for diving into a position that you maybe don't like or you don't agree with. I interviewed a gentleman who wrote a book called The Thin Book of Trust. And that book was really powerful, I thought, because it broke trust into 4 components. Okay. And actually, after I did that interview, I reached out to somebody I know that I had been engaging with. I said this on the podcast too, that I had told that person that I didn't trust them. And it really impacted our relationship. And I was able to say, no, you know what? You remember when I said that? And they were like, yeah, no, I remember when you said that. And I said, it's not that I don't trust you. It's that there's a reliability problem. I trust that you care about me. I trust that you are able to do these things. I trust that you want to do these things, but there's been inconsistency in delivery of doing these things. That's the issue I have. It's not you. It's not a trust in you. I believe in you, but there's an inconsistency. And it gave you the ability to unpack something that really was like a closed fist. I don't trust you. Open it up and be like, here's the pieces. And I say all that to say that I see the power in what you were just explaining the same way. Instead of getting in there and being like, you're wrong, you're an idiot, how could you think that? Whatever, you can say, okay, that's an interesting position. Tell me, what do you want out of this? You can paint anything you want. What are your goals in this situation? I sense there are some concerns that you have. What are your biggest concerns here that may be shaping the opinion that you have? And you can actually play the detective or the coach, however you want to think about it, and actually be the one to lead this with other people. I think that's probably the more realistic power that this gives you.
Yes, so that you've done your homework, because the 4 questions it works 2 ways. It works to investigate my own stuff, and then it works as a beautiful framework to ask questions of others to help them open their hand.
Yeah.
To help them meet you there.
Yeah.
So it's beautiful either way. But in conversation with other people, you can do your best to open and to then ask questions about their thinking. And a lot of times you'll have success, but there will be moments where you won't. And if you do your best, it's okay to say, you know what, thank you. You know, as a person, this is great, but I'm not feeling we're having an honest conversation about this, so I'm just not going to continue this. It's okay to not waste your energy if you hit a brick wall and to generously move beyond.
I think that's a powerful point too, because I've been in these conversations and you can feel so much pressure to change the person and get it right or get to a consensus, get to whatever outcome you have. And the reality is you can't all the time. And so I think that's a good reminder is the goal is to do the best you can and to make sure that you are showing up, having done the work on yourself and being willing to help others through that work. And then if they're not willing to go there, there's nothing you can do. And so sometimes you just have to walk away politely.
Yeah. And you don't have to get angry. You acknowledge that you can't agree on facts. You can't open their hand. And so say, thank you, and don't waste your energy. Part of it is self-protection too. They have boundaries to say, I don't need to engage in that kind of, because they're looking for a fight, basically.
Yeah. We've all been in those scenarios.
And I'm curious about the book about trust, because in my book, under the commitment conversation, I break trust into 3 parts.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Reliability, competence, and sincerity.
Yes. For some reason, I did not take notes on that section, but yes, very similar to the other book. What were say yours again?
Reliability.
Yeah.
Competence and sincerity.
Those were 3 right on from the other book. And now that you say those 3, I'm blanking on what the 4th one was. Maybe capability.
Yeah,
so
I would categorize that as competence.
Yeah. So maybe
can they actually do what I'm asking?
Can they do it? Are they reliable in doing it?
Are they sincere?
Do they care about you? Are they sincere that they want to do this thing? Are they capable of doing it? And then can they deliver on it? Those are the 4 pieces of it. So I think you've combined the care and the sincerity into one. But yeah, no, similar, very similar, and very powerful.
I wouldn't be surprised if we followed our roots back. He and I have some of the same teachers or something.
Yeah, there you go. Don't go buy that book. Go buy Chuck's book.
Buy them both.
Buy them both. There you go. Even better. And so, Chuck, your book is The Art of Conscious Conversations, Transforming How We Talk, Listen, and Interact. Anything else that you want to share before we wrap up here that we haven't covered? There's a lot more in the book, so I would encourage people to read it if you like this conversation. There's a bunch still underlined on my question sheet in front of me that we've not gotten to, but I know we're out of time. Just curious if there's anything that jumps out to you that you'd want to add at the end.
No, I would say just let people know that we talked about stories. We talked about collaborative conversations. The other 2 conversations are creative conversations and commitment conversations, which are the promises we made. And we, as humans, we have a pattern. We love our stories and we love the action conversation, which is the promises we make. And what we do is we do this conversational bypass. It's what I call a conversational bypass. We tell our story, our position, and someone with authority says, okay, what are we going to do? And what we do is we bypass the middle 2, collaborative and creative, that are really juicy conversations, but harder to do. And it takes conscious effort and time to do them.
Yeah.
So that's just a brief overview of the 4.
That's funny because I have had some folks on here talking about design thinking and experience design. And those are the steps that get skipped the most in any design process. And design is really just a way to make decisions and solve problems. What you're talking about, that resonates too, because in your case, this is just conversationally solving problems. And so, yeah, of course, their principles would apply. That's the fun thing. I say it all the time. People are sick of hearing me say it, but it's the fun thing about hosting the show is I can bring on somebody like you who is so focused on the conversations. I can bring in somebody on trust and it's exactly the same. The frameworks, the principles at the base of this are the same. I can bring in someone on design. Again, the principles are the same. And I think even though they're the same, it's worth hearing it in a lot of contexts because it just solidifies really what those principles are. They're the ones that have the most weight to them and they fall out the bottom. And it's okay, now here's the big things I need to be paying attention to. Chuck, this was a lot of fun. Really enjoyed the book, really enjoyed the conversation. I appreciate you coming on the show and appreciate everybody listening. As I said at the beginning of this, I think words matter. I think our intentions do matter. Tone matters, even though my wife will laugh hearing me say that. Everything in humanity comes down to how we communicate. It's just communication is one of those principles. And so if we can all be better communicators and if we can help others through their communication challenges, it only makes the world a better place, makes our world a better place. So
yeah,
Chuck,
and if we think about it, our conversations are the one human universal tool that we share.
Beautiful way to end that. All right. Good luck out there, everybody. Hope you have better, more beautiful conversations.
Thanks for having me.
Hey folks, one last thing before you go. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to hit subscribe so you can stay up to date with future guests. That's it. Thanks for coming. Go make the most of your business and the people in it.